Firstly, Richard, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to spend some of your time during the course of this charity event. I know you only have 45 minutes that you can give us, so we will be as quick as you can. Also, people, I'm sure, will be very familiar with Thunderfoot. And before we jump into it, although I do have to say one thing, this is obviously in support of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. We are looking for donations, and if you look above the video box, you will see a number of active links: PayPal, First Giving, eBay, Justgiving, Chip In, and also the schedule. If you click on one of those, it will open up in a separate box. You will not lose your place in the room. You will not you will not miss any of the show. So please give as generously as you can. Richard, there are about 35 people involved in this event, and without exception, I was going to say almost without exception, but it was without exception, everyone who was asked agreed to participate. There seems to be a natural human condition of altruism and charitable work, which some may seem runs contrary to evolution or the theory of evolution. What are your comments on that? Why are people altruistic, and why are people so willing to do charitable work?
Yes, that at first sight appears to be a slightly difficult question, and my first book, The Selfish Gene, could in a way have been called The Altruistic Individual, because my aim was to explain how selfish genes, which is the sort of bedrock of Darwinian theory, can give rise to altruistic organisms. And the theory has various levels of sophistication. At the bottom level, genes can cause individuals to work for their own kin or other individuals who might reciprocate a favor. So both those could be seen as kind of selfishness in disguise. And when you get on to more, what shall we say, more genuine altruism, more sort of human type altruism, such as giving money to charity, you have to explain it, I think, in a sort of only half Darwinian way. And my way would be to say that it's a kind of byproduct of those primitive motives to altruism, namely kin and reciprocation. One way to put it is that our ancestors were naturally selected in an environment where they lived in small bands or villages, like baboons do today a bit. And so everybody that you ever met would be quite likely to be kin, and quite likely to be an individual who would be in a position to do a favor to you later on. So the rule of thumb that got built into the brain would have been, be good to everyone you meet. There's no reason why natural selection should, so to speak, have a kind of cognitive awareness of exactly why the animal is doing what it does. Rather, a rule of thumb, a brain rule, gets favored by natural selection, and in this case, be nice to everybody would have been favored. We have empathy, we have sympathy, we have a tendency to feel sad when we see another person being sad. But if we see a crying child, we want to go and comfort the child. We can't bear suffering. Most of us can't. I mean, there are psychopaths who don't mind that. But I think this is a kind of built-in rule of thumb, a bit like sexual lust, because sexual lust, after all, still is very strong in us, even though we may, if we're female, we may be on the pill, we may know that there's no chance of begetting a child if we're male. Nevertheless, we still have lust. And it's a similar thing. We have a lust to be nice, a lust to be good, a lust to be sympathetic, that is still there, even though we're now living in a time and place where the original Darwinian motivation to be nice and good may have been superseded.
You referred there to your, I think it was your first book, The Selfish Gene. And if I recall correctly at the time, there were some people, whether deliberately or not, misunderstood your message. And I remember, am I right to say that there were times when you were getting blamed for Thatcherism and yuppieism?
Yeah.
And the views of Arthur Scargill. Tell us what the
Yeah,
misunderstanding
yeah,
was
yeah.
and how you got this reputation.
Well, a lot of the misunderstanding came from people who read the book by title only, and they, as I've put it before, they neglected to read the rather substantial footnote to the title, which is the book itself. The particular reference to the justifying Thatcherism, that was a left-wing intellectual scientist called Stephen Rose, who blamed John Maynard Smith, the great Sussex biologist, and me for, not exactly for Mrs. Thatcher, but for sort of creating a scientific climate in which Thatcherism could thrive. As Maynard Smith said, what should we have done? Falsified the equations? Actually, it's something that I've always emphasized, that Darwinian natural selection is definitely not a normative idea. It's definitely not something that we should base our morals upon. Quite the contrary. We should, and actually said this in The Selfish Gene, we should learn Darwinism so as to avoid basing our lives on it, so as to avoid basing our society, our politics, and our ethics on it. Darwinism is an object lesson in how not to behave. It is the truth about how we came into existence, but it's something to be rebelled against.
You mentioned morals there, and if they don't come naturally to us, which I'm not sure whether that's what you're saying. I think morals do come naturally. I mean, we've talked about empathy and understanding. Have I missed that point?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, they come naturally to us, but originally, in a Darwinian sense, in this restricted way to kin and to potential reciprocators. But they've generalized. You could call it a sort of mistake in a way. I mean, it's a blessed mistake. It's a very good mistake, delightful mistake. But in a sense, you could call it a Darwinian mistake. But it's a very effective mistake, just as having lust when you know you can't have children is a Darwinian mistake. Just as adopting children is a Darwinian mistake. Nevertheless, these are all highly laudable and they're very real, powerful emotions.
Thunder. I mean, for me, I always found the fascinating thing here is the balance between what is cultural and what is biological. And it's one of those very humbling. For instance, language is very plastic. It doesn't particularly matter what language you use. There is always language in the equation, but which one it is doesn't really matter. It's a very flat landscape. And then, of course, you go up to the things which have to be almost entirely biological. The things about looking after children. It's almost universally difficult for people to even imagine doing harm to children. It's that biologically wired into them. And then there's these sort of grey areas in between, which is, I think, that's where a lot of the religious people get their foothold in this sort of grey area between the two. I mean, things like, thou shalt not kill, lie, and so forth, those are biological almost requirements. If you kill more people than you're an extinct species. If you lie more than you actually communicate information, there's no point in language. But it's those fuzzy bits in between which I find in many ways the fascinating bits. No.
Was that a question?
Oh, sorry. You wanted me to ask a question.
I thought you had a few in mind. Yes. So, I'm sorry. I was assuming you were asking a question, and I couldn't see where it was coming from. Do go.
No, I thought you were just asking for some sort of input. No.
I think we may have lost Richard. Just 1 second. We'll see.
That'll teach me to do too much talking.
Yeah.
All worked perfectly fine when I was keeping quiet. I was going to make some. I was going to make some comment about atheists wear blue, but
Yes.
only on a Saturday.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's next for the Richard Dawkins Foundation?
Oh, well, we've got a lot of things on the go. The new version of the website, which the wonderful team in America has been working on very strenuously, completely rewritten the website a completely new way. And that's just been launched, and it seems to be doing extremely well. It's written in such a way that it can be expanded, and it can also accommodate other websites which might wish to use the same format, which might have some kind of something in common with us. So that's a big thing that's just on the go at the moment. We're still very involved with the Clergy Project, which is, as you know, rescuing clergy people, or giving them at least a place where they can go and discuss with each other, cry on each other's shoulders, discuss their problems. They've got big problems. They're very large number. We've got about 150 now, I understand, of clergy people who have lost their faith. They've become atheists, but they don't quite know how to escape from their way of life. I'm not seeing either of you. Are you hearing me?
We're hearing you perfectly.
Okay.
We're not seeing you, but rather than try and resolve the issue, we could end the call and restart it. That would probably help. If it will mean that we lose a couple of minutes.
Well, can the audience see us, or is it just we who can't see each other?
Well, the audience
just
appears
can't
to be able to see. Yeah, it's only you that we can't see. You could try turning your camera off and then back on. That occasionally does help.
Can the audience see me?
No.
Okay.
But they can hear you.
Okay. I'll turn it off and on again. I can now see me, and I can see Thunderfoot.
And I think that might be working. You did change briefly on the actual broadcast, but you're back to a spinning circle now. That's kind of annoying.
Our technical man is saying that he can restart the call in a couple of seconds. Shall we do that?
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Okay, Tony, can we end this call and can you restart it? Shall I end it, or I don't think it matters. We'll be back in a minute or so. Do bear with us. There's no point in trying to resolve it halfway through. We're literally almost halfway through Richard's time. We'll just leave it as it is. Okay, I think we're back live. Looks as if we're not able to sort out Richard Dawkins' camera, but we certainly have his audio, so we'll carry on with that. Hopefully it will resolve itself. I can't remember what point we reached. Oh, we were talking about the website.
Yes, that's going very well. Then we were talking about the Clergy Project, and there are about 150 of these clergy people who are debating with each other and thinking about coming out. 3 or 4 of them have already come out and have landed on their feet, and that's going very well. And the Richard Dawkins Foundation is one of the partners involved in that, along with other people like Dan Dennett and Linda Lascola and Dan Barker. What else? We've got a partnership with Lou Appignani, and we've got a series of so-called Appignani lectures, which we're getting off the ground to promote secularism around the United States, and in the form of lectures. We're doing a fair number of videos, DVDs, vignettes, as we call them. These are small little sort of lecturettes, sort of 5-minute little lectures, which are supposed to bring out one particular point in science or something else, which can be used by teachers to sort of drop into their lectures. And they're kind of one-off points that are made by a lecturer. It might be me, it might be somebody else. We've got quite a few of those now.
So will you be also, when you did the magical reality, that was almost a sort of a new format for very much embracing the new e-technology. So there were little apps and the such, like if you got the electronic form of the book, that kids could use for almost interactive learning.
That's right. I mean, publishing is moving in that direction, obviously. And when my publishers had brought out the hardback, they independently commissioned a company, a specialist in making apps, to do an app version of the Magic of Reality. And it is the full book. You could think of it as an e-book because it's all there, pictures and all. You can read your way right through the book. But there are also simulations, demonstrations, games, as you'd expect of an app. It's being sold as an app, but actually it's an e-book plus in a way.
Yeah, and in many ways, I think
if I can just, because that's a useful segue into reminding people about the eBay auction, which is one of the ways we're raising money. I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, Richard, but 3 of your books, The Selfish Gene, and 2 others, which I made a note of. I apologise, I can't remember offhand what they are actually on the eBay auction, and they have been bought by someone who will be meeting Richard in the United States in October, and within reason and decorum, they're going to be have a personalised message from Richard with his signature on them. The Selfish Gene at the moment is going for over $400, but the other ones were less than that the last time I looked. And also, maybe a useful segue into telling us about your latest book that you're working on, Richard.
I was persuaded by my British and American publishers that I ought to do an autobiography. That's what I'm now working on. You hear my slightly embarrassed laugh. I'm a little bit self-conscious about doing this. Actually, it's going surprisingly well. I'm through childhood, and I've reached the age of about 34, and I'm steadily growing up. Childhood was assisted by the fact that my mother remembers a lot of detail, and I go and talk to her a lot about my childhood and getting funny stories from her, which I put in the book. In adulthood, I've reached the stage where I'm talking mostly about science, and I hope that's all right. I mean, I'd welcome your opinion, actually. I'm now quite largely talking about my scientific work in my 30s and 40s, and I hope I can make it interesting. It's obviously a lot less personal than the childhood part of the book, which is, I suppose, entirely personal. The justification for putting childhood in, of course, is that it's supposed to, explain how I came to be what I was as an adult. But
do you think that has explained it, having gone through the process of writing about your childhood?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that anybody's childhood can be sort of quite interesting in a way. I mean, I had a very, I suppose you might say, privileged childhood. I mean, I was sent to boarding schools, rather expensive boarding schools in England. I had a very good education. Along with that went a lot of cruelty, a lot of bullying. These schools are not as bad as they were, but and they weren't as bad in my time as they were in an earlier time. But nevertheless, being sent away to boarding school at the age of 7 is quite a traumatic experience, and that I think probably comes through. I think I was something of a late developer as a scientist, that I didn't really develop a major enthusiasm for science, which I now have enormously. Didn't really develop that until I was at Oxford at the age of about 19. So that in a way is a bit late, but that's the truth anyway.
Do you think that when the book is published, your critics, the theists, will go through it with a tooth comb, particularly your childhood, trying to identify why it is that you hate God so much?
No. I mean, the truth of the matter is that I just care about truth. I mean, I care passionately about what's true. And so, obviously, therefore, I regard the question of whether there is anything supernatural, any sort of gods, any sort of magic spells. It's a very important question, because if it's true, then the world in which we live is a very different kind of world from the one in which I think we live, the scientific world. So if you care about the truth, then I think you're pretty well bound to care about religious questions. You can't just regard them as boring and uninteresting and peripheral. But they're totally barking up the wrong tree if they're looking for, I was abused by a priest or something like that. Nothing of the kind. There's nothing like that. I was given a very rather liberal religious upbringing. I went to, my schools were Anglican Church of England schools. The Church of England, it's a very weakened strain of the virus. I mean, it doesn't, they don't indoctrinate like Muslims or Roman Catholics. And so I can't really complain of that.
Sorry, Sandra, if I could make very quickly. One of the people you interviewed, I think, in the series The Root of All Evil was someone I have to say is my favourite bishop, the former Bishop of Oxford, Richard Harries, who is so liberal that you actually, when you were talking with him, you asked him whether there was any point in him having this faith at all. And I think, sorry, do go on. Did you recall his answer? I think it was, there were certain things that he did think were necessary.
Right. For him, the one sort of irreducible thing, the one thing that he couldn't give up was the resurrection. And he wasn't really bothered about any of the rest, about virgin birth and things like that. I've actually been quite surprised, and I'd be interested to know your experience of this. I thought that sophisticated theologians were supposed to say, oh, it's all metaphorical. And I've been accused of going after easy targets, people like Ted Haggard, sort of fundamentalist loonies. And people have said, why don't you go after sophisticated theologians? So I've started talking to sophisticated theologians, and I've been pretty amazed, actually, by how literalistic.
Disappointing?
Well, I mean, the Archbishop of Canterbury believes in miracles. Another sophisticated theologian that I spoke to believes that Jesus turned water into wine. These people aren't supposed to do that. They're supposed to say, well, that's all metaphorical. But no, they seem to, I mean, the line they seem to take is, well, I believe in the resurrection. That's the one thing I won't give up. And if Jesus is capable of the resurrection, he might as well do everything else as well, I think, is their attitude.
Thunder, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly make a point about Church of England, as far as I can see, is more of a country club where religion is just the colour of the wallpaper. I mean, it really is like that it's a social club more than religion. Most of the people who go to the churches, they just like getting together and singing. You ask a lot of these people, do they actually believe any of it? And it's like, well, not really, but, you know, I like getting together and singing. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's largely right. And that's one possible explanation for why those countries in Western Europe that have an established church, like England and like the Scandinavian countries, they are the least religious countries in the world. And it could be because it's become part of the wallpaper, as you say. It's become sort of boring. Whereas in America, where there is no established church, and constitutionally, the very idea of an established church is anathema. And America is founded on secularism. That laid the way open to religion as free enterprise to become exciting and charismatic, and to fragment into a whole lot of churches competing with each other for congregations, for lucrative tithes. And so you get a very different atmosphere about religion in America. It's not boring, it's just wrong.
Can I go back to the question you asked about our experiences of or encounters or conversations with distinguished theologians? I have to say that I find them as disappointing as any other theologian or believer. You're right, a lot of them do refer to things being allegorical or metaphorical and the like, but when pressed, they are unable to explain which bits are and by what metric they test whether it is allegorical or metaphoric. Much like objective morality, they say that objective morals believe, if you ask exist, but if you ask them how you test whether a moral is objective or not, they fail miserably in coming out with it. So coming up with any proper definition. So it's like, where are the proper theologians?
They just pick and choose, and if you actually look at what they pick and choose, it tends to be whatever is consonant with the current zeitgeist, whatever it is. I mean, in the early 21st century, we have certain moral values which are very much labeling of the 21st century. I mean, things like the equality of women, no slavery, no racism, preferably no isms of any kind. I mean, no ageism. That's very different from what it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago, let alone 200 years ago. And so the morals that we have, the values that we have, label us as members of the decade in which we live, whether or not we are religious. Whether we're religious or not is pretty irrelevant. And so when these people look to their scriptures for the bits that they want to admit as taken literally, and the bits they just say are allegorical, it tends to be whatever fits in with the moral zeitgeist of their time. And if they're 21st century people, they will pick out the bits that say treat the sexes equally, whereas if they were 19th century, they wouldn't. Whatever it is, they don't get their decision from Scripture. Scripture is a kind of afterthought. They just choose which bits of Scripture to include.
Yes, and the most obvious example is looking at the list of things that you're forbidden to do in Leviticus. Next to "Thou shalt not lie with another man" is "Don't eat shellfish." One of which seems still to be relevant to these people today, but the other one not so. Thunder.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that always bugs me about this sort of criticism about you only pick on the weak targets is that it's the constantly moving goalpost. It's a universal criticism you can level no matter who you're actually going up against. And what I've usually found is that, all right, yes, you made that sort of superstitious belief look like nonsense in that one, but what about all of the others? And my reckoning is that the prime thing that discriminates the sophisticated and the unsophisticated theologians for the large part is how good a salesman they are. And I won't name names, but a lot of the sophisticated theologians really do come across as very good used car salesmen. It's a lousy product, but they're very good at selling it.
That's true, but when you look at their sales technique, I'm astonished anybody falls for it. I mean, they're just such smooth operators. I would run a mile if any of them tried to sell me a used car. They just look so insincere. They're obvious charlatans, but yet it seems to work.
There seems also to be an unhealthy attraction now for child preachers. Have you noticed that?
That's horrifying, and the abuse of children by religious people one tends to emphasize sexual abuse, but there's all sorts of other abuse going on. These horrific camps that they run, where they teach children to be soldiers for Jesus and to hate all other religions, and almost like military drill. And then you get these child preachers, these ridiculous little children, mouthing the absurd platitudes that they've been taught from the cradle upwards. It is horrifying.
Again, going back to, I think it was again the root of all evil. You interviewed a lady whose name is on the tip of my tongue. She was brought up with the Plymouth Brethren, now works as a psychologist helping people come out of religion. Do you recall the interview?
She's a very, very nice woman, and I too have forgotten her name. It's Jill something.
It begins with an M. Mytton.
Yes.
Mytton or something like that. But I'm sorry?
I think the name is Jill Mytton. I think you're right.
Yes. What I like to do, so those that tell me that religious indoctrination cannot be considered as a form of child abuse, I played that interview to them. Do you want to, perhaps your recollection of basically her background and story will be better than mine?
This woman, she herself had been brought up, I forget what the cult was. I think it might have been Plymouth. No, it wasn't Plymouth Brethren.
I think it was Plymouth Brethren. We'll check.
Brethren, I think. And she had real horror stories about her own upbringing and the people that, having finally broken free herself, she was then starting an organization to help other people escape from the same organization and from other such cults. I found especially moving was her expression of what it was like to fear hell. And they were told in no uncertain terms that they really were going to burn for all eternity if they, not just if they sinned, but if they ever left the brethren, and if they ever did anything to contradict the elders. it's an astonishing power that these people have to manipulate people, especially children, by these truly dreadful threats. There's a kind of law, I think, just like digression here, but there's a law that says that the more implausible a threat is, the more horrible it has to be in order to carry weight. So that an ordinary threat that a parent might give to punish a child with some minor punishment for some minor infraction, that works because it's plausible. The child knows that the parent could actually carry it out. But a threat to burn the child forever and ever and ever in a lake of fire, that needs to be as horrible as that because it's so implausible. And that was a bit of a digression, but I think that may be why the threat of hell is so appalling. It's because it has an intrinsic implausibility that has to be compensated for.
But don't forget, God loves you.
But he loves, yes, that wonderful Carlin thing.
Yes. Thunder.
I mean, that's absolutely the way that all hazards are assessed. There's the consequence of it and the chance of it happening, and things that have very high costs associated with them. Like walking along a road, you don't worry about too much. But if there's a 1,000-foot drop on one side, you take a lot more caution about which way you go and the such like. And so you're right, you just jack one of the consequence up to infinity, and it's basically abusing people's ability to assess hazards.
Exactly.
But in many ways, I would see the threatening children like that at that sort of vulnerable age in a sort of similar way that I would actually see drinking during pregnancy. When you drink during pregnancy, the related developmental pathways are much more metabolic than actually neurological. But you can have very big effects from drinking, a small amount of drinking during pregnancy. Now, the mental development is from, if I remember rightly, from childbirth up to about 25-ish. That's the window of development of the mind. And I think you do some really quite serious damage by telling people these psychologically damaging stories during that developmental window. It's messed up.
Yes. I suppose religious indoctrination does exploit these things. I don't know whether we want to accuse them of actually knowing what they're doing, or whether it's kind of evolved over time as being a good technique.
Well, I mean, successful patterns usually sort themselves out, but when you actually understand what's going on, I know what the problem is, that these sorts of analyses are likely to produce disproportionate reactions from religious folks. So, I mean, even if you take someone in from Islam and tell them that they are actually abusing their child by telling them these horror stories, that will produce that now forces them to confront the problem that religion might actually be doing real damage to their children. And so at that point, you've forced them to choose.
Yeah. Yes.
Richard, I noticed the time. I wonder if we can just finish off, hopefully on an optimistic note, perhaps not. You've probably got more experience than most people of the situation so far as religion is concerned in both this country and also in the United States. Is there room for optimism that things are changing?
I really think there is. I mean, I see the figures. The polls seem to be trending in the right direction, slowly but surely. Is a number of people who answer none, N-O-N-E, as opposed to N-U-N, in a census or a poll seems to be going up. No religion. In my British foundation, the Richard Dawkins Foundation UK, conducted a poll immediately after the 2011 census in Britain, where the census rather deplorably actually asked people what their religion was. and about 54% said Christian, as opposed to about 70% in the census 10 years earlier. And my foundation, commissioned a poll only of those people who tick the Christian box to ask them what it is you really believe. And we found that although it was only 54% tick the Christian box, when you actually ask them what they believe, they're not Christian at all, most of them. They don't go to church, they don't know the Bible. Only 39% of the people who tick the Christian box could identify Matthew as the first book of the New Testament, even in just a four-way choice. They were given Matthew, Acts of the Apostles, Psalms, and Genesis. And only 39% got Genesis. This is not of the population at large. This is people who claim to be Christian. And when we asked them, why do you claim to be Christian? They didn't say, I believe that Jesus is my Lord and Savior. They said, oh, because I like to think of myself as a good person. Well, that's not a Christian country. That's a country that's moving in the right direction, moving in the direction of wanting to be a good person, but not accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior. When I look around the internet, I see signs of encouragement. I see young people who are giving up the religion in which they were indoctrinated. And so, yes, I think there are grounds for optimism, certainly in America, certainly in Britain, in Western Europe. The Islamic world's another matter, and I think Islam is one of the great evils of the world, and I don't know what the answer to it is.
Well, I know that Thunder has made this observation many times. He was amazed when he attended the Reason Rally, which of course you spoke of, and I attended it as well, the number of young people who were there. And also, slightly off topic, I went to the Cheltenham Science Festival earlier this year, and there were as many children as there were adults. And what I thought was most endearing was that the longest queue for any of the tents to go, whether children's toys or whatever, were being held, was a Lego tent. They wanted to go and play with Lego before they wanted to play with computers or games, which I thought was encouraging. So I don't know. Thunder, what were your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point about the Reason Rally, that's the real sign of encouragement. It's the way a lot of these demographics change is literally dead men's shoes as the old people die off. It's the new generation. Their ideas is what the future of civilization will look like. And you look around at the recent rally, and there are a lot of young people there, a very young demographic, and that I found very hopeful.
And it was raining as well, so even though it was raining, we got huge numbers.
Yes, the numbers were impressive. Richard,
and we're doing the Reason Rally again in 4 years, yes?
2016, apparently. There we are. Richard, I noticed the time. Thank you very much indeed for contributing to this event. And can I just remind people, I've actually found the list of the books that are on the eBay auction, which you can find if you click on the eBay banner, on the eBay logo on the banner. They are The Magic of Reality, The Selfish Gene, and The God Delusion, all of which will be personally signed within reasonable limits and decorum by Richard Dawkins mid-October, and they're all hardbacks as well, I should say. Don't forget that. So worth bidding on. Again, Richard, thank you very much indeed. Yes, please.
I want to say that I do think that Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, is an absolutely excellent charity, and it's the one charity, one of the two charities, Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders, that the Richard Dawkins Foundation has supported rather substantially, actually, to the tune of $500,000 over the Haiti earthquake. So it is an excellent charity. It's one of the few charities that really is genuinely secular and is not tied to the apron strings of any kind of religion, which is one of the reasons why the Richard Dawkins Foundation supported it.
Thank you very much. And I can just remind you that when we end this section, there will be a short video, and we will then be joined by Mark Dubois for 15 minutes. He is the head of MSF UK, so he will be able to tell us more about the charity. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm acutely aware of the time, Richard. Thank you very much indeed again. As I say, after a short video, we'll be back with Mark Dubois. Thank you.